just in case. Don't you just love this guy? Woo. And as well, Ken. Oh, there you are. Okay. Yeah, no, not really, not really. It's me. It's not you. I'm so. Thank you for bringing us someone new and all. What a great group you put together up here. Thank you. I just can't say enough about it. It's sort of become who we are. And, you know, I tell people, I said, our group now, I said, get used to it. They're a little rowdy, but decorum isn't really like the highest thing on our list, is it? I mean, we'll go to another church if we decided that that's important. Well, I had a joke for you today. It seems there's a little boy, and he goes to his mother and says, Mother, he said, I'm all confused. He said, you've told me about how we came from Adam and Eve, and here Dad's telling me that we came from monkeys. And she said, that's his side of the family. Title I have here is Hold On to That Angel. That means so much that probably you won't feel necessarily everything I felt about that. That meant so much, that just that item of holding on to that angel, because certainly I believe that in whatever form that we have entities into our life, we can call them angels, spirit, however you want to, but I believe that various forms guiding us along, guides, by the way, are definitely in our life. There are all the things we need if we're paying attention. That's important, paying attention. I wanted to do a little sort of biographical sketch of a person in the Bible. Now, I've been approached by people over the years that say, do you know that could all that thing about the Bible be true? I said, do you know what? I don't spend one moment thinking about that, because what I do, I find a story, or I find whatever it is, and a lot of history has been confirmed that the true parts from way back, and there's been evidence, and archaeologists have discovered things that everything we've discovered promotes it as truth, as opposed to a fairy tale or embellishment or a Jewish story. So just to let you know where I stand on it all, I always just sort of, what I'm reading, I accept that, and what I find in that is the blessing to me. Do you see? So judging it or trying to decide, there's someone that I went to hear speak once, and the first thing he said was, I'm here to set the record straight. Well, trust me, I'm not here for that purpose. I could care less. Now, Jacob is such an interesting character to me, because someone who's really taken a good look at their own flaws and then discovers that somebody else that God used in a big way had flaws too. Let me tell you a little bit about him. First of all, just when he was born, he was a twin. And Jacob and Esau. Okay? Does anybody here remember the story? Okay, you remember the story. And there's hands, okay. Now, pardon?
I don't remember the story.
Well, I'm not going to tell the whole one because it's so long, but I'm going to tell you enough to where you get the idea. They were twins. Now, the unusual thing is that when they were born, Esau was born first, which means that he gets all the blessings, the birthright, the dad's blessing, all of these things. But he was holding on to the heel of Esau, Jacob was. Now, That's an unusual fact. And that sort of seemed to have a spiritual significance. But then, as life went on, we discovered that Esau was sort of a strong, hairy, it describes him hairy, man that liked to hunt and fish and was out in the wild all the time and bringing back food for his dad and things of this nature. And Jacob, his mother, by the way, Rachel, loved him the best. And he stayed home with Mama baking cookies. Well, it was something else, but that gives you some idea. It did say he stayed home helping Mother. Now, I've had relatives that, when I think about them, they're baking cookies with Mama. Well, that just sort of gives me a clue as to the type of person he was. Now, he was always inferior or felt inferior to Esau. This is just a fact, because Esau was the strongest, the dad loved Esau the best, and the mother just sort of coddled him. And so he lived sort of in that inferiority of his brother, which I know what that's like, because I had a brother 12 years older. And so when I was 6 years old, he went off to World War II and became a pilot and flew more missions than you could imagine. I mean, that one person doing in one war. And the stories about him that my mother and dad used to tell, it was just like describing God, and I felt as small as I was. And and by the way, in 1968, he came to work for me and spent the rest of his life working for me. That was an unusual thing, and I got to know him better, and I didn't feel any more inferior. But a wonderful person, not taking away from any of that. But the idea being, I really get an idea of what Jacob went through, because here's this guy in his family, this twin brother that is so great, and he can feel so small. Now, that's not all of it. Now, it's not as though just that feeling, but that feeling directed him. Not only feels inferior to his brother, but he tricks his brother. Now, it came a day that Esau spent so much time out in the field that he comes back, he hasn't had food in days, and he's starving. And what's Jacob doing? He's brewing a lentil soup. And so he says, well, to Esau wants food. I'm hungry. Okay. He's giving him food, but he says, I want something in return. I want your birthright. Wow. And Esau's statement was this: well, if I starve to death and die, what good's the birthright? So he gave it away. But in essence, it's tricking, okay? And then in that day and time, there was always the blessing of the father, which created the success. Well, when that came about, Mother Rebecca said, your brother now has gone out to hunt food, and she said, I'm preparing something, and she said, we're going to put some stuff on you that makes you feel hairy and smell like your brother. Now, I had to think a long time about that, but this is what happened. And so the blessing of Esau then was upon the younger rather than the one where it belongs. So the thing he did now is he tricked his brother, he deceived his father, and he, in essence, just steals all of his brother's blessings, which were very important in that day. Now, this is so interesting to me because this is a character sketch, isn't it? This is telling you what this guy is really like. Now, how then could God pick him as the father of a nation? Well, the idea being, it tells us not so much about Jacob. This whole story it's about Jacob, but it's really telling you about God, because God isn't that person out there somewhere remote, but all of the energy of the universe. And the truth is that whatever we're experiencing, that God is present right there and is always on our side. Now, Everything depends, or the catalyst is this, that we have the faith and belief that God is on our side and that God is working in our behalf. Now, and that God's love for us, no matter what has happened in our life, God's love never fails. Now, let's get to the next idea here. There's still karma, isn't there? Okay? Well, let's look at the karma that's here. It's sort of, I wrote down this note, karma strikes. And does it ever? I've watched it in my own life. That's why I'm an authority on it. Not because of anything you've told me, but because of what I've experienced. But Jacob goes to find a wife. Now, unlike Esau, who took a wife from the pagans, he goes back to his family, to their clan that they came from. And so he comes to find this beautiful lady named Rachel. Now, her father, his father-in-law to be, is the source of sort of like paybacks, because Laban is sort of a tricky guy. He said, if you work for me for 7 years, you can have my daughter. Well, when it came time for the wedding, do you know what the Sigliester is? I mean, the ugly sister. Well, there was one called Leah, and it was an older daughter that he couldn't seem to give away. So he disguised her, and the wedding there was, he was getting Leah instead of Rachel. And the father-in-law explained it. He said, wouldn't this be a dirty trick? Now, it matches the dirty tricks he's played all of his life, see? But then he worked 7 more years, and then he has Rachel too. But then that wasn't enough, because the father-in-law saw that this person now had some kind of blessing that he carried with him, and that the whole thing was prospering. In other words, his clan was prospering all the time Jacob's there, that everything he seemed to touch turned to good. Well, he didn't want him to leave. So finally then there came a day that he leaves. And it's sort of what I call his breaking out period. Now, the thing about breaking out is you've got to finally reach that belief in yourself and your relationship to God. This is the thing that is so hard. When we look at the inferior idea that he had of himself, and when you look at all of the things that happened along the way in his life, you wonder how Jacob ever could just survive it all. But it is that thing of seeking God, because I can see it in all of the little lines and trying to read all of that history. I went back to the beginning again to sort of review it. And you can see that even though it's somewhat in ignorance, there is something so powerful about simply seeking. Whatever it is sort of a mystery to me. But I know that somewhere in my mind, that all through difficulties that I've had, there was that thing of seeking. I can remember when, not even going to church, but that at 7 o'clock in the morning, this is back in the late 70s and early 80s, through a very difficult time, but I would turn on the TV and watch Robert Schuller and the Hour of Power. And it just kept on, every Sunday, it was like became part of my life. Because even though I wasn't participating in anything particularly for good, but there was a seeking. I have this feeling, and you can't just interview everybody, but I have this feeling that there is something in everyone that is drawing us toward a relationship with God. Something way within. This was within Jacob. He was acknowledging it. This is the difference. I think Esau was out here just fat, done, and happy and doing what he does, but Jacob was seeking, and I believe that this made the difference. This makes the difference in what happens to us along the way, because sometimes we get confused about events that seem to turn our life or change things. But then if we are seeking, it gives a different interpretation to the events that come along in our life. But he was breaking out. Life had trapped him, and I think that he was living with a great deal of disappointment. Now, when you think about somebody thousands of years ago, and this is what they're experiencing, isn't it wonderful that no one today has to live with disappointment? No? We do. We have this thing come up within us that creates the type of events, and the turning point or the difference is when we are still seeking and not giving up. Because that's what this really is a story about. On his way in the breakout, Jacob, it's like had nearly a nation of people with him. That's what used to happen in that day. Because there wasn't factories for people to go to work. There wasn't restaurants and things of this nature where you could go get a job. And so somebody with a lot of wealth took care of a lot of people. And this was the case. So when he left, it was like a small nation leaving. But then Laban, his father-in-law, came after him with all of his troops because they would have armies with them too. I don't know that Jacob did, but Laban certainly must have coming after him. Well, a warning came from God. Said an angel spoke to him and said, look, leave this guy alone. And I understand that because I think that sometimes there are those, it's like entity. I know that in dreams I've had warnings about certain things saying this is something really important. And it may just be, I remember that 2 or 3 different times, it's just like a little man appeared to me. When I say little, not really little, but just an ordinary, so ordinary, and gave me instructions. There's times, only a couple of times in my life, that my mother has really played a part. I know that shortly after I started dating Pat, this happened to me. And her only word and sentence was don't screw this one up. Don't screw this one up. Well, anyway, I took it seriously. I take all of those things pretty seriously because, we want to communicate with Spirit, don't we? And I think Jacob was doing that. And then there was this help going on in that the angel stopped Laban from overtaking him. And one other unusual thing as he's progressing back toward the homeland is the fear, because Esau is out there someplace and has become great and has armies and lots of people, and like he's a nation on his own out there someplace. Well, as he proceeds on, we discover that Esau is coming to greet him. So Jacob, in his fear then, do you like this story? Okay. Sends a group that includes the wives that he likes the least way out here. And then there's this second, and it's just like waves of people that are going to meet Esau, and all of them have gifts. It's like, if I give you enough, I'm going to be okay, and you're not going to be mad at me anymore. And then he's way back here with his favorite wife and favorite children. And so, now, in the meantime, he goes to sleep at night, and this is the turning point in his life. It says that he wrestled with a man, and it describes it like an entity. So I always call it an angel, but it's like God or man, whatever it was a real experience to him. And in the wrestling, daybreak came, and he refused to let go until whoever it was blessed him. And so he did receive a blessing. This is not exactly, the blessing is more complicated than this, but this is like the one from the Father. This is the one that just keeps reoccurring that I'm going to read to you. May God give you of heaven's dew and averse richness, an abundance of grain and new wine. Sounds good. May nations serve you and people bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed. Now, he wouldn't give up until he had a blessing. And this blessing that he received gave him a new name. Said, what the entity said, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." And he said, "Well, from now on, it will be Israel." Now, I have seen 5 definitions of what that means in the Hebrew, but in essence, it's saying he wrestled with God and man and prevailed. This is our turning point. When we have a point in our life to where we're saying, I don't care how this comes out, but I am not going to give up on what I believe. I believe that God is for me, that God is blessing me, and that whatever appears in front of me, whether it looks bad, whether it looks good, everything is leading me to another place spiritually, to another level, if there is such things. I don't know. I use that word rather cautiously because I'm not really sure. Well, okay, so he gets up from this event, and he's got to go face his greatest fear, which is Esau coming with, it says, 400 soldiers or men or whatever, you know. He's coming, and so there's that first wave that greets him, and the second wave, and the third wave. Now then, when he meets Esau, he's in such fear, but Esau runs to him and hugs him, kisses him on the cheek, and there is that great embrace. Do you know what I learned from that? Usually our fear that is out there someplace is just waiting to give us a hug. Have you ever thought of that? Do you ever sit and think how that thing which we feared in life, that thing which made us uncomfortable in life, that thing which seems to destroy what we've been believing in, is that thing which will finally, in the end, give us a great hug? I like to think of everything I think and see about the metaphysics of stories like this makes me realize that that applies to me too. If there's something in my life that's scaring me, I think as you get to my age, there's fewer and fewer things that do that. You know, you say, what else can happen? You reach that point. But whatever it is, Jacob took all of these steps, but the first one was seeking God. The first thing was seeking God. The second one was then beginning bit by bit to surrender. It wasn't like it was suddenly. Nothing really. I know that I go to, every once in a while, I remember turning on the TV, and there's this Vietnamese guy, and he's doing positive thinking seminars about how to flip houses and how to get rich real quick, you know. And he said, I came here 6 months ago. By the way, he's on a Rolls Royce, and there's a beautiful lady on each side of him. And he's saying, I came here 6 months ago, and I couldn't even speak English, and now I'm a multimillionaire, you know. I mean, he's got all this. Well, I don't believe it really happens quite that fast, because I've bought and sold a few houses, and I don't. Ingrid, do you see it that way? You don't make millions in 6 months, do you? Okay, but the idea being that bit by bit, life changes for us, and I think we have to take it gradually. I think that we have to get used to where we are at this point and know that there is another point. The journey of life isn't over because we have achieved a few things. I can't think of really anything that could be achieved that would be the end of the journey, you know, other than becoming Jesus, you know. I can't really think of anything else. Well, keep this in mind then. We are, just like Jacob, living in God's promise, because he had those blessings that flowed out from various sources through his life. But the promise that I see that is the most important, that it's just like anything that comes up in my life, I have this feeling that God is on my side, that the energy that is in my space, that is there to bless me specifically, that no matter what else life looks like, that this is mine. and that this blessing is mine, this blessedness, and that the intent of my life is to, it's like plenty of food and wine and whatever else it said in the blessing, it doesn't have to be the wine, but it could be whatever you think the good life is. That really and truly is yours because you are a part of divinity. You are a part of the God energy. There is a dimension of yourself that is already in that relationship, that invisible part of you. I like the scripture. I'm having to stop and think I think 2 Corinthians, and I'm looking for the verse up here someplace. It's registering. Do you hear the clicking? But here's what it says. It makes a comparison of the physical body, the physical life that you have, with the spiritual life. And it refers to that as a treasure in an earthen vessel. And I'm here to tell you for sure this morning,